What is up, everybody? Before we get into today's episode of It Takes Balls, I just wanted to share a little exciting tidbit. My wife and I wrote a children's book titled What's Wrong with Billy's Balls? What's Wrong with Billy's Balls uses golf as a euphemism for checking for testicular cancer and for asking for help when you believe that it's needed. We hope that this book will open up the conversation for survivors with their sons, but the story also applies to everybody in general. You can pick up What's Wrong with Billy's Balls on Amazon or on testiscancer.org. It's important to note, though, that proceeds from the book, no matter where it's sold, benefit the organization. However, purchasing it on testiscancer.org benefits the organization a little bit more. And while you're on testiscancer.org, make sure you pick up some of these cool shirts. We have a lot of educational materials that you can distribute in your community or show your support for your loved one or just your pride as a survivor. So again, What's Wrong with Billy's Balls, available now. Thank you guys so much. Let's get into today's episode. It Takes Balls is brought to you by our new sponsor, D's Nuts. Yes, you heard that right. If you've never heard of them, check them out at grabdsnuts.com. But warning, these are not your grandparents' peanuts. D's Nuts is really shaking up the nut game. They're gourmet, fun, and packed with flavor. Whether you're a fan of savory flavors like ranch, sriracha, or hot cheddar, spicy like ghost pepper, or if you have a sweet tooth like me, you like the banana pudding. D's Nuts has something for everyone. But D's Nuts aren't just about taste, they're about making a difference. For every bag, can, or piece of D's Nuts merch purchased using the coupon code NUTCHECK on grabdsnuts.com, you can save 10%, and another 10% gets donated towards supporting Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation. So the next time you're craving a snack that's both delicious and meaningful, reach for D's Nuts. Because when it comes to supporting Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation, it takes balls and it takes D's Nuts. Available at grabdsnuts.com, Amazon, and Walmart locations nationwide. D's Nuts, a delicious, healthy snack in a variety of fun flavors and making a difference one nut at a time. The stories shared on It Takes Balls are unique to the individual sharing. Always speak with your trusted medical provider for treatment options specific to you. Welcome back to It Takes Balls, presented by Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation. It's been a while since we've had a caregiver and a survivor on at the same time. So today I'm joined by Julie and Jeff Hughes from New York. Julie is Jeff's caregiver, and Jeff is a two-time survivor. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you, Stephen.
So before we talk about like the caregiver perspective and your testicular cancer story, like what's you guys' backstory?
You want to go ahead?
You can go.
Julie and I met back in 2011, and we met through just some friends, and in short, things moved pretty rapidly, and as we'll get into in a little bit, it was actually at the end of 2011 that I had my first diagnosis with testicular cancer. So, I mean, we didn't know each other real long before we were faced with this. So it was something that strengthened our relationship pretty quickly.
Yeah. And Julie, what was that like being so fresh in the relationship and then having testicular cancer come up?
Yeah, that was when he told me that day. I mean, I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I think you just can't even grasp it at the time. And we were probably dating maybe 8 or 9 months. So to have to like tell his family and, you're just in this relationship, it's fairly new. That was hard. And what we had to face, just some of the decisions Jeff had to make, that was, not something we planned, obviously.
Yeah. And I know you guys, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, well, I was just saying, but it was a gift because, interesting enough, when I look back, I'm thinking, oh, I never considered saying, okay, see you later,
That's great. 8 or 9 months into the relationship, obviously, maybe you weren't talking about kids yet, but was that something that you were concerned about at all, being that fresh into it?
Yeah. One of the moments that really struck me was, I found the lump on a Saturday, and Monday morning I was in a fertility clinic with surgery planned that afternoon. So within 48 hours, I'm sitting in a fertility clinic, and as other guys know, you have to sign the papers that say, hey, if you die, can she use your sperm to have children? And that was definitely just a moment that hit me, to think, well, we've been together several months. I think she's someone I want to marry, but to have it in black and white right in front of me, like, hey, if you don't survive this cancer, can you carry on when you're gone through her? And that was definitely a moment that made me pause.
Yeah. And Julie, what about for you? What was that like, having to consider the kid factor that early on?
Yeah, that was, you know, I was like, I don't really want children right now. Like, I wasn't even thinking about kids. So again, that really just sped up that decision. And then to find out that he was like, oh yeah, you're gonna have the sperm if I don't make it. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't even know what I thought, at that moment. I don't even remember, but I just remember being like, oh my goodness. Everything was just happening so quickly that we didn't really have a moment to pause and like think this through, but which was probably good.
Yeah. How old were you guys at this time?
I was 37 years old. So
I was
the
30.
thought of, I knew at that point when we had met, and even after just a few months, I was already thinking about marriage and family. So for me, it was something that it was already kind of in my mind, but we really hadn't discussed it a whole lot at that point. And you were what? You were
32,
30.
31?
He was
Yeah.
32.
Well, yeah.
My diagnosis when I found the lump was what, 3-4 days before her birthday. And my surgery, I think, was the day before her birthday or the day of your birthday.
Yeah. I don't know. After maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not the best timing, obviously.
So you got to be a caregiver for your birthday.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Happy birthday. I'm going to go in and lose my left testicle. So,
So let's talk specifically about the cancer. So what was it that caused you to notice? You said you felt a lump.
Yeah. So what happened was Friday night, we went to a Syracuse University basketball game versus Florida. It was a good game at the time. Both teams were good, and we came home. Syracuse won. She went to bed. I was still excited about the game, and I told her, I said, I'm going to stay up and watch the highlights on ESPN Sports Center. And for some reason, she went to bed, and I just was watching the game, and I happened to reach down and felt a lump, solid as could be. And almost immediately, I thought testicular cancer. But, I was nervous. I didn't wake her up. I went to bed kind of hoping, hey, maybe I'll wake up in the morning. It won't be there. But in the morning, it was still there. And I ended up calling a doctor, and things moved very quickly. That day, I was actually getting a sonogram, even though it was a Saturday, and getting the results. And so things moved pretty quick. I was in surgery on Monday, like I said earlier. So things moved very rapidly.
Yeah. How were you able to get such a quick turnaround over the weekend?
Well, I'm a physician, and I knew the urology group. I knew several guys in the group. Ironically, when I called, the doctor on call was somebody I didn't know, but as I came to find out later, he was an excellent doctor. And kind of the same thing. I said, wow, you guys move so fast. But he told me, he said, with testicular cancer, I don't wait, which I thought was fantastic, especially in hindsight. The fact that I called him on a Saturday morning, he's on call. He arranged for me to get a sonogram. He called me with the results. And I think by the end of that day, I can't remember if it was Sunday. Like I said, he pretty much said, hey, Monday morning, you're going to a fertility clinic at 8:00, like when they open. And you're going to see me in my office around noon or so, I think he said. And I'm probably going to have you in the operating room by 2-3 o'clock. It was It was really, really awesome care. But like I said, found out later after talking to other people in the group, and I actually took care of some of the staff members in that group. They said that's just the way he worked. They said he doesn't mess around, he gets right to it. So we were very, very, very fortunate.
Yeah. And Julie, what was it like being were you in the waiting room when he had his orchiectomy?
Yes.
I know.
Yes. With parents, we waited. That was nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I know like
Yeah.
my mom, the surgeon said it was going to be 30 minutes and like that wasn't counting the prep time and everything. So after 30 minutes went by, she was freaking out that something went wrong. So, I mean, were you guys feeling those emotions too?
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was a lot longer than they mentioned. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh.
What advice do you have like for
But
somebody who's in the waiting room? Like, is there something you can do to occupy your time?
well, it was nice to have his parents there. So I think it's nice if you can have someone there with you to talk to. I think, again, what I know now, I'm like, oh, could have brought a book. I could have wrote. I mean, there's all these other things I could have done. I got up and down a lot. Um, but definitely if you can have some support, for sure.
So after the orchiectomy, what were your next steps? Did you get your pathology and find out what stage you were?
Well, ironically, the doctor who took care of me went on vacation. So, and he told me that. He said, I'm going to operate on you, but then a colleague will actually see you after the surgery. So I didn't even see him after the surgery. I saw one of his partners who I knew very well, who was basically same age as me. We had worked together on call at a local hospital, so that was nice. But I remember he told me the doctor that did my surgery said, be out of work a couple weeks, which was hard because I ran my own practice with another doctor. So missing a couple weeks of work was hard. And I remember he said, don't go back early. And of course I did. And I was exhausted. I didn't last very long. I lasted maybe half a day and then had to leave. But I remember sitting home and being very, very uneasy about everything. I can remember watching a comedy, and to this day, I didn't laugh. To this day, I don't remember hardly anything about the movie. I was so just concerned about the pathology results. I can remember my father coming out and we went to lunch at like Pizza Hut or something just to try to distract me. I can remember waiting for the pathology, just being extremely anxious. And then that whole week, he had told me it'll be a week, at least till next week. But then the following week, Monday came and went, and I didn't hear anything. And I thought, well, he's just getting back from vacation. He's probably behind. And then I think it was another day, and I didn't hear anything. And of course, you start thinking the worst. I'm thinking, well, he hasn't called me because it must be a bad pathology and things aren't good. But ultimately, he did call and apologized. He just said, I got back from vacation. I had so much to do. And we got good news. It was seminoma, pure seminoma, which, I think most people familiar with testicular cancer know that's, a good one to have. And he set me up with a medical oncologist just to go over, if there'd be more treatment involved. So that was the first week or two that I remember.
What was it like for you, Julie, waiting for the pathology?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I was at work, so I think that helped. I went back to work at that time. And I think in my mind, I just figured, okay, he had the surgery. And I don't know if I remember them mentioning, we didn't think he was going to need chemo at that time. So I think in my head, I'm thinking, okay, he had the surgery, everything will be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the physician background, did that, you think, help or hurt you with the waiting game?
Um, to be honest, I thought it was going to help. Like initially, just hearing seminoma, I was like, okay, I know seminoma has very good survival and cure rates. However, I, just like a lot of people, I went right to the worst case scenario. I still look things up online that, like a lot of people do, and let myself go down rabbit holes and things like that. I kept thinking, I have access to a lot of medical sites that give very detailed information. So of course, it didn't take me long to find the absolute worst testicular cancer cases, and scenarios. So I think all in all, there was good and bad to being a physician and having this diagnosis. It's good to have a general information. I think knowing that testicular cancer in general is a cancer that can have good outcomes, that was helpful. So I didn't have that overwhelming just ignorance. I knew there was a good chance we were going to be in a good spot, but at the same time, I sometimes a little too much. So,
what were the next steps after you saw the medical oncologist?
Yeah, so we saw a medical oncologist, and he went over the pathology and said I was stage 1B, I believe. He was very good. He went through and just said, in your situation, 85% of men will not have any recurrence if we don't do anything else from here. He drew a nice diagram of the anatomy, and I remember the pathology showed that it had crossed some barrier toward the lymph system, which concerned me. I said, it looks like it's crossed this line here. And he said, well, it's still considered a stage 1, not a stage 2. And then he did mention that even though it's an 85% chance that you're done with just the orchiectomy, he said there's still a 15% chance you could have a recurrence. And so I said, well, what could we do to lower that? And he said, well, you can go through the chemo. And I remember initially saying, well, let's just do the chemo. I want the lowest chance. And I can remember him saying, he kind of hesitated and said the chemo's rough. But I was 37, had been in good health. So I was thinking, hey, I can take it. Should we just do it? But I wanted to trust his judgment. And I just asked, I said, what do you recommend? And he said, I would recommend observation. I would recommend that we don't do the chemotherapy, that we do the regular observation. We're going to, keep a very close eye on you. And so we decided to go with that.
And Julie, what was that like for you, the decision that he had made to do surveillance?
I think I was glad because, we were just starting out. And looking back now, I just wonder if that really was a blessing, because if he did the chemo, would we have been able to have children naturally? That was one thing that came up. The gift that came out of this was, we were able to have children. We didn't have to resort to the fertility clinic after all. And because this reoccurred, I know that Jeff kind of was like, and kind of beating himself up. Maybe I should have done the chemo back then. And I said, you know what? No, maybe we wouldn't have been able to have children if you did. So I just, because we can go back and beat ourselves up, and I'm like, no, let's not do that, because look at these gifts because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I assume, so you went 5 years with surveillance. At what point did you guys get married?
Yeah. Shortly after
Quickly.
2012.
I was going to say we were married in September of 2012. So basically within 9-10 months of this diagnosis, we, I went through the surgery. I got back to work fairly quickly. And then we got engaged and we started talking about, having a family, and we wondered, are we going to have trouble getting pregnant? And we didn't. We got pregnant very quickly, and got married in September, and it all moved very fast. It moved very fast. I mean, we had our son in February 2013. So, I mean, within a year and a half of this diagnosis, we were engaged, bought a house, married, and had our first child. So we don't want to screw around. We figured, let's just stop pedal to the metal and go for it. So,
so after you had made the decision to do surveillance, like, did it ever kind of move to the back of your mind, the 15% chance of recurrence, or were you constantly thinking about it for the next 11 years before it recurred?
Yeah, to be honest, so being a physician, I got my CAT scans literally half a mile from my office. And so when I would go in and get my CT scans, they literally would say, as soon as I was done, hey, go talk to the radiologist. He'll look at them with you. I mean, again, being a physician and knowing the physicians, that was a benefit I had. I didn't have to wait. So I'd get my scans done. I'd go back in, and I knew most of the radiologists, and they'd look at them with me, which was nice. But one of the things that came up, I think on the third or fourth scan, was one of my peri-aortic lymph nodes, which is the number one spot, that the cancer tends to spread, looked a little large. And I'll forget the details. I think they were using a centimeter as the cutoff, and mine was 0.8 or 0.9. But I was very concerned about that. Just being a physician and knowing that was a spot with high likelihood of spread. It was always in the back of my mind. I had a couple scans in a row where it went up like a millimeter. And again, the radiologist would say, well, it can be just a slice of the image and things like that. And then I had one scan where it seemed to go down by a millimeter or two. But in the back of my mind, I got to be honest, Stephen, I was uneasy. I was uneasy about that one lymph node. And one of the things that we've talked about is my original urologist that did the surgery. Within my 5 years of surveillance, he ended up retiring, and I got moved to another urologist. But before he left, he said to me, Jeff, I know you're doing well and you're in surveillance. He said, but my advice is, he goes, don't lose track of this. He said, I've seen seminoma come back years later. He said it can be a slow grower. He goes, so even when you're done with your 5 years, he goes, I'd recommend you get a CT every year or so. And I just remember that sticking with me, him mentioning that before he retired and left. He said, I've seen this thing come back way down the road for guys. So don't just lose track of it.
Yeah. And you said you had it was like the third or fourth CT scan, you saw the node that had kind of grown. Julie, did he share that with you? And what did that do to you?
No, I don't remember. And maybe he did, but I don't recall him ever sharing that with me. So I'm thinking, and I heard the doctor, oh, he's cured, it's not coming back. And again, this is what I heard. So I'm just like, okay, we're on our way. Our life is good. And I'm thinking this isn't coming back, and 10 years later,
Yeah.
we had, again, it came back.
With that accelerated timeline of your relationship, was your first child born or not by the time you had that node that had grown?
Yeah, he was already born.
Okay.
And then we had our daughter 18 months later. So honestly, I don't remember the exact timeline, but it was probably around the time we had our daughter that that node first was there. Um, I was still confident to a degree because I knew we had the chemotherapy as an option, and the node was small. Um, but yeah, I kept thinking about it. But honestly, after the 5 years, when we hit the 5 year mark and the node seemed to be okay, I actually reached a point of acceptance, thinking I'm fine. The node hasn't really seemed to grow much, and I felt fine. I was feeling good. We had two babies, and I was just all in on that. So I think that at that point, I just kind of moved forward psychologically, thinking, "Hey, we're past this now."
Yeah. And did you get those yearly CT scans that he had recommended before retiring?
I followed up with a urologist, and I'm trying to remember because I think I was still getting yearly CTs, but I believed either between the urologist and oncologist, they said maybe we'll do them every couple years. Because I also had, I had a little concern about getting so many scans. At that point, I was up to, I don't know how many scans I'd had. I might have been in the double digits. And, I started weighing that also, how many scans do you want to get just with the amount of radiation and all that. So.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question because I'm coming up on 5 years and I don't know if I want to keep getting scans or not.
Yeah, exactly. I honestly don't know how many scans I've had at this point. Now going through it a second time. But yeah, that's the thing. I think that, as you know, and other guys know, there's all the anxiety that comes with the scans. I personally, one time, I can't remember, I think it was the third or fourth year in. Don't ask me why, but after my scan, I got really sick. Most of the time I was fine, but one time it was almost like I had a reaction. I felt like I had the flu the rest of the day. I just really got sick and weak. It's the only time it ever happened, so it must have been something else. But, after having that one experience too, of having a scan where I just felt really awful for the rest of the day, I was ready to be done with them for sure. I didn't really want to keep doing them.
Yeah. Let's fast forward to, I guess, 2021 or 2022 when you noticed something else that had changed.
Yeah. Yeah. 2021 was a good year for us. Julie ran the Boston Marathon. They actually ran it in the fall that year because of everything that had gone on with the pandemic. And that was, that was kind of a lifelong dream of hers. So we went in October and we had a fantastic trip to Boston. I felt good. We came back, and in November, we did a local turkey trot on Thanksgiving. And I can remember Julian and our son Brinsley. They're both good runners, so that they were running, doing the little turkey trot. My daughter and I tend to walk, but toward the end, my daughter said, "Dad, let's just run the last part." And I said, "Yeah, let's run." And we went to run, and I up to that point, I'd never. I mean, she was still very little. I was always much faster than her, and she usually couldn't keep up with me. And she kept running, and I was ready to stop. I was just tired. And she kept running. I was like, "Come on, Dad." And I thought, well, I got my boots on. Maybe it's that. Well, geez, I haven't been doing much. I'm getting older. I must be out of shape. But that was the first sign. I just thought, wow, that's weird. I can't keep up. And so after that, I actually tried running, just around the neighborhood. And I've never been a great runner, but I was finding after half a mile, three-quarters of a mile, um, I felt like I had to like literally sit down on the side of the road. And there was one time I ran and I tried to push through it, and I actually thought I might just kind of collapse. I just thought, I don't know what's going on. This is strange. And from there, over the next few weeks, it just got worse and worse and worse, where I was tired, dizzy spells, shakes. Definitely knew something wasn't right, but I kind of chalked it up to maybe I was just working too much, maybe stressed and things like that. So hindsight's 2020. Definitely there were a lot of warning signs.
Julie, was he sharing these with you?
In the beginning, no, I didn't know some of the things he was experiencing. After Thanksgiving, I was paying more attention to how he looked, and I noticed he wasn't eating as much. He was losing weight. He was paler. And I just was like, oh, you're going to see a doctor? Because I don't know. I would, I'm trying not to beat myself up, but I wish I was more pushy. Get to the doctor right now. Let's check this out. But to be honest, like, I don't know, in that moment, cancer really wasn't on my radar until like December, when I was like, oh my gosh, he's really struggling. I could tell he'd sit down for dinner. He wouldn't eat anything. He just looked so pale. And I was like, oh gosh, and that's when I started to think, oh my gosh. And I was like, you need to get to the doctor. So that's when, he made an appointment and got in January.
Yeah. So what did they find when you went in January with all those other symptoms?
So what ended up happening was, by the time I finally went to my regular doctor, my primary doctor, and got blood work, I was actually at work, I think the next day or 2 days later, and I pulled up my own lab results, and I was very anemic. And I've always been a person with very high red blood cell counts, like very high. So I think my red blood cell counts were almost half of my normal. So when I saw him at work, I almost panicked, to be honest. I was working at the VA at that time, and I literally walked down the hall to a friend of mine and I said, you got to come look at my blood work. And he was like, whoa. And I said, I know. And I just was very nervous. And as soon as I saw it, I was thinking cancer. I was like, this has got to be why, there's no other reason for me to be anemic. And feeling as poorly as I am and losing weight. And there's a lot of cancer in my family anyways. So I wasn't really thinking necessarily the testicular cancer had come back. I actually was worried it was a new cancer. And that was my biggest concern. And one of the other things that I had kind of ignored was there was actually a few times where I had the dark stools, which, I knew when they happened, I was like, boy, those are dark and they look like they're, blood in there. But then a day or two later, I was like, I don't think it's as dark as it was. Must have not been anything. But in hindsight, obviously, there was a lot of denial on my part. Even being a physician, I think I just didn't want to believe it. I really didn't want to believe it.
So had it metastasized to your abdomen somewhere, or?
Yeah. So finally what happened was, after that, the thought was maybe I had an ulcer. I ended up one morning, I was getting ready for work, and I almost literally collapsed at the bathroom sink getting ready for work. And she said, "That's enough. We're going to the emergency room." Because I was scheduled to see a gastroenterologist in a couple weeks or so. And ironically, I had just about 9 months earlier, I had gone for a screening colonoscopy because I was 46, 47 years old, and they were in the process of changing the guidelines from 50 to 45. So I went and I had a colonoscopy and an upper endoscopy. And the gastroenterologist is a friend of mine. And I had gotten both done because I told her I occasionally had heartburn and everything was fine. So when this whole thing happened, I called her and said, I'm not feeling well and all this. And she said, maybe it's an ulcer. And that's when they originally said a couple weeks. But we went to the emergency room that one morning because I was so sick. And they did a CT scan and it showed thickening around my duodenum, which is the first part of your small intestine past the stomach, which can be a site for an ulcer. But I was thinking cancer. And that's as soon as they found that, they called my gastroenterologist and she moved up the endoscopy. Knowing that I was anemic and that I'd been to the emergency room, they moved the endoscopy up to within a few days. Yeah.
So, Julie, from your point of view, like when you finally told him, all right, we got to go to the emergency room, I mean, were your kids noticing changes with him too? Or what was that like?
Yeah, I think that was what really made me start to think there's something wrong. This isn't an ulcer. Because he's on the couch, he's not playing with the kids, and my son noticed, what's wrong with Dad? He's so tired all the time. Why doesn't he want to play with me? And that was really hard to hear. So then when that morning came and he almost just collapsed on me, I'm like, we've got to get you to the hospital. And I would have loved it to be an ulcer, but I knew just by what I was seeing day in and day out, it has to be something else. Just they're not eating and very fatigued. And then he was sharing some of the symptoms he was having. And so, yeah.
So when did you find out that it was a recurrence of testicular cancer?
Well, it took a little bit. We went in for the endoscopy. And when I came out, she called in Julie, and she's a friend of mine, the gastroenterologist, and she said, I found a tumor in your duodenum. And typically tumors in the duodenum are really aggressive and poor prognosis in general if they come directly from the duodenum or from the pancreas. So immediately I was very concerned. And then she said, but it didn't look like a typical duodenal cancer. And I said, what do you mean? She said, they typically look almost like a fungus or a mushroom, and this one looked very smooth. And she said, I honestly haven't really seen something like this in the duodenum before, so we're going to send it off for pathology, obviously. And she said, I'm going to send you right to an oncologist that I know. And I know most of the local oncologists, but she sent me to a guy I didn't really know. And I was feeling so poorly at this point. I was so tired that I couldn't make any real decisions anyways. So I said, whatever you say, I'll do. I trust you. And so when she sent us to the oncologist, we got in within a few days and the pathology wasn't back yet. But essentially, to make a long story short, when they first saw the pathology, the first pathologist or two that read it thought maybe lymphoma, just because lymphoma is common in the duodenum. And seminoma is quite rare to go to the duodenum. It doesn't happen very often when it metastasizes. So most of the pathologists didn't believe it was seminoma, even though the original pathology said something about the architecture of the cells could represent a testicular malignancy. And our oncologist, as soon as he saw that, he said, "This is your old testicular cancer. Come back." He told us, I've called several colleagues around the country and everybody says, "No way." He said, "But I'm almost certain it's your testicular cancer. So we're gonna have it looked at by more pathologists." So it did take a little extra time. But eventually he called and said, "We've had it looked at by several." We sent it down to Sloan Kettering in New York City. And he said, "It's confirmed, it's your seminoma has come back," which was good. At the beginning, he even said whether it's seminoma or lymphoma, he said, "We can treat both of these very well." So that was encouraging just to hear pretty early on, "Hey, we feel comfortable, we can treat this." But then when he said seminoma, just knowing that seminoma tends to have a good response to chemo, I was encouraged. Although we later found out that when it's metastasized, especially to the GI tract, your cure/survival goes from high 90s down to about 80%. Which 80% is still good, but when you're used to hearing seminoma having a survival rate in the high 90s, 80% doesn't sound so good. Yeah.
What was it like hearing the word cancer again, Julie?
Ugh, I was mad. I was mad because, again, I remember when this first happened, hearing, "You're cured, this isn't coming back." So I had a lot of emotions. I was scared. I was scared for my children. What am I going to tell them? I think that was the biggest thing. This was different. We had kids now. And so it kept me up at night. How, what words do I use? How do I even start this conversation? So that was really a struggle. But I learned as I went. Just little information at a time, and we did well through it.
Yeah. How did you share it with your kids?
Well, I didn't want to use the C word. So initially when we sat down to tell them, we started with, "Okay, Dad's anemic. This is why he's been so tired. This is why he hasn't been able to play with you. It's not that he doesn't want to. This is, what's going on. He has seminoma." And initially I thought they were going to come back with, "Well, what is seminoma?" But at that moment, they didn't. We just said, "Dad's going to have chemotherapy." And my kids knew when they heard chemotherapy, that was enough. So we stopped the conversation there. And then we had another conversation because then he was going to get the port. Okay, he's going to have this quarter-sized protrusion in his chest. We need to sit down and have another conversation. And so we would sit down over some snacks, and talk about that. Okay, we're going to share this little bit of information. And I found that, I don't know, it worked for us to just share a little bit of chunks of information and not to overload them. And when that was enough, then that's all I stopped. I didn't keep going. And that helped. And luckily they had each other. My kids had each other too.
How old were they at this point?
Brinsley was 10 and Delaney was 8.
22.
Yeah.
Brinsley was 10 and Delaney was 8.
Delaney was 8. Yeah. And I just had to reassure them because, it was ironically like 2 weeks before we told them, my daughter comes home from school and is like, "Oh, the kids were talking about cancer and saying that, people die." And I was like, oh my gosh, it just was crazy that she hears this and we know what her dad has, So I really initially had to really stress that, listen, there's a lot of cancers, they're treatable. The one that Dad has is treatable. He's going to be okay. We're going to be here. We're going to take care of you. So just to keep giving them that reassurance every day
Yeah.
was important.
Yeah. I think you guys handled that well, it sounds like.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the kids did fairly well with it.
Yeah.
I think we had maybe just one time where my daughter kind of broke down hearing, when it kind of dawned on her. Otherwise, they both seem to handle it well. And again, at that age, how much really sinks in is hard to know. But they eventually, I mean, they knew I had cancer. I mean, they knew it was cancer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad it went as well as it did.
This might be a question that we don't know the answer to, but was it a recurrence of the original cancer, or did it stem from the remaining testicle? Did you have to have your right testicle removed?
Yeah, so nope, the thought is that it was still just left over from the original. I did not have to have the right testicle removed. My oncologist was very thorough. He had, I had physical exams, but he said, I'm still going to get an ultrasound of the remaining testicle. Even though I don't feel anything and you don't feel anything, he said, we got to get it. So he did the ultrasound. I had CAT scans, PET scan. I even asked for an MRI of the brain, just knowing that it can go to the brain. And I had been feeling so poorly that, I had some here and there. And so he said, well, let's get an MRI of the brain. So I had pretty much, everything checked and double checked. And the thought was that it just was left over from the first cancer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when you had your chemotherapy, did you have 4 times EP, or what did it change based on the fact that it was a recurrence?
No, so he said, this is going to be tough chemo. So we went over the options, and it was the cisplatin and etoposide and bleomycin in 4 cycles. And, we can get into it a little bit, but I remember after the 3rd cycle, I was really struggling. And the Neulasta actually, really hit me hard on 3rd cycle. It was perhaps my worst particular day was when after my 3rd cycle and I got the Neulasta and it went in, I woke up at 3 a.m. with such incredible bone pain. I just was in so much pain. It was honestly probably my worst day. And I went back and said, do we have to do round 4? And he said, well, for the best chance, we do 4 rounds. He said, you can stop at 3, and he went over numbers. He said, it cuts your chance of cure from whatever to whatever. And, you just say, well, okay, let's go for the 4th round. So we ended up with 4 full rounds.
Where was your bone pain? Because mine was in my hips, and that's still to this day is the worst pain I've ever felt in my life.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean to perk up, but it's nice to hear. I don't mean to in that way, but it's nice to know I wasn't alone in that. Mine was my legs, my hips, and my upper arms.
Your elbow. I remember your elbow.
My elbow.
Your thumbs.
And my thumbs. Yeah, believe it or not. I forgot about, I can't believe I must have wanted to forget about the thumb.
Sorry.
I remember saying to her, I feel like somebody has just hit my thumb with a hammer multiple times, and it continues to hit it with a hammer. My thumb just hurt. I couldn't believe how much it hurt. So it was several spots.
And Julie, while he was down for the count with this chemo, what was it like kind of running the show around there with everybody under your authority?
Yeah, it was challenging. But my kids and I, we played a lot. My goal that season was okay, we are going to find joy every day. And I kept moving, I kept writing. That kind of just helped me work through all these emotions I was having. Um, you know, getting outside was a huge thing. The kids and I, let's get outside and play. Let's, go to the library. We would just stay active and really just be grateful. I was grateful I could take care of Jeff, that I could take care of my children, that we had my mom and his parents close by to help, to give me a break from maybe driving him from an appointment, to help. Hey, can you pick up the children? So I think a lesson I had to really learn during this was to ask for help, to receive help. That was really hard for me in the beginning because I wasn't sick. So I felt like I can do this. I don't need anybody, but I had to recognize it wasn't just me, it was my children. And this was going to help me take care of them better if I had other people taking care of me too. So I guess I really encourage, if other caregivers are listening and other families, I really encourage you, if you have like a good group of friends and family and a support system, to really lean on them. Because people do want to help and they wanted to be there. So that was really helpful.
Yeah, previous guests that we had on mentioned caregivers as co-survivors, and I think that is true. I mean, you also went through it, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. And it was hard to see. It's hard to see your loved one in so much pain and there's nothing you can do. I couldn't take any of that away. And I think there's that powerlessness you feel.
Yeah. It's tough as a husband, and a dad to feel so, weak and, just run down and not able to do what you want to do. There's guilt. There's all sorts of, feeling like you're pathetic and things like that, even though you got a real illness, it's as real as it gets, but just you feel like, as a husband, I was worried about her. I knew she was taking on a lot. And, the last thing I wanted was for her to get sick from being run down. So yeah, definitely having all the support we had was huge blessing, but and it took me a long time. It took me a very, very, very long time to get back to doing a lot of the things I just was accustomed to doing as being a dad and husband in the household. It took a long, long time to get back to my routine. And even now, sometimes, it's not, sometimes you get a little fatigued and things like that. But it was a long, long process.
Yeah, you touched a little bit on before about kind of the feeling of should you have done the chemo back in the day. I want to hear more about that from each of your points of view. So Jeff, let's start with you, like the feeling of should you have done it back then?
Yeah, I've to be honest, I don't have any regrets at this point. I feel very much like Julie said earlier, we have two incredible kids and I wouldn't change that for anything. And so I just feel like it went the way it did for a reason. And honestly, I really don't give it any second thoughts. I just feel like, no, I trusted the doctors at the time. I did my own research on it and I felt like, yeah, we'll go with the numbers here. We'll go with them. And even though it came back and we went through a really rough spot, I really wouldn't change it. I really wouldn't. What about you?
Yeah. Well, for me, I just, like I said, I didn't realize that there was still a spot sort of there that was tiny. And you probably told me, but I would go to his appointments in the beginning and the doctor was just really encouraging. And again, I heard, and maybe I didn't, but maybe I just wanted to hear, this isn't coming back, he's cured. And so I just was like, okay. And to be honest, during that time too, we kind of like just went on with our lives. We didn't really
started a
talk
family.
about it. We just went and we didn't really process it. And maybe that's okay. And that's why I think the second go was just like just
Yeah.
a way different experience for so many, just because of so many things. We are married now, we have children. Now he's going through chemo. So that's why initially when I wrote this book, it was for me to heal, to process. And I'm thinking, well, maybe this will help other families and caregivers.
Yeah, I think it's great to hear that you don't have regrets, because I think that's one thing that a lot of people who are stage 1, they're not sure what to do. And maybe they'll opt to have treatment that they don't necessarily need, but there's really no way to know until it happens again. So it's just a tough decision to make. Julie, you've mentioned your book. It's a Real Ballbuster, Untangling Testicular Cancer. So tell us about the book.
Yeah. And I have to give my husband the credit. He thought of the title and my friend Louise helped me with the tagline. But, I just mentioned a lot of what the gifts, the things we've learned, the lessons, again, just to try to be a light to other families and caregivers walking through this, because it's not easy. And so I share a lot of, what people did for us, the things they provided for us, what I learned as a parent, how I approach the conversations with my kids, because, I know we're all different, but maybe something in there would be helpful. And to spread hope, really to spread hope and gratitude, because we're here, we're stronger, we're wiser, we're kinder because of it.
Yeah.
And it's allowed my kids, it's allowed Jeff, it's allowed us to talk about this, because, at first I was hesitant. Should I publish this book? But I'm glad we did, because it's allowed us to talk about more. I noticed Jeff is talking about it more and processing it with me, because when you're through it, you're so tired and not feeling well. So there was no conversations, so now we can have those now, which is a gift to heal more.
I know it's for me, it was like a lot of people. And I saw one of your other podcasts, there was mention about like, sometimes you want to forget about it. You want to just you don't want to think about it. But then when you're like, for me, the holidays are tough, because that's when both times I discovered it. And so, even this last time in November, I got scans, and of course some little thing showed. And it just sent me right into not being in a good spot again. My oncologist reviewed it, said, this is nothing. I had an extra endoscopy. Everything turned out fine, but just, I think as survivors, you walk that balance between, you want to talk about it and process it. You need to, but at the same time, at times you don't want to think about it. You just want to say, hey, let's not bring up that stuff. Let me just go about being normal for a few hours, and just, I don't want to think about cancer being part of our lives. But I really do think we all got to process it at our own pace. And, it's not going to be healthy to just ignore it and not work through it. So I still walk that balance with it, and sometimes I like to think about it. And other times, like yesterday, going to see my doctor for a routine follow-up, I was like, I don't want to be here today. I just don't, sometimes I go and it's fine. I'm like, whatever, draw my blood, do whatever. Yesterday, I was like, I just don't want to come today. I just don't want to be here. But that's just part of the process.
Yeah. Great insight. I look forward to reading the book.
Oh,
Good.
thank you,
Yeah.
Stephen.
I know
Hope
there's a chapter
On
of it
your
on
way.
our website.
Yes, yes.
So if people want to check that out, then buy a copy. It's up there on testthiscancer.org. And I think we have the links to either your website or where they can get the book.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Where
And
else
I'm
can
excited
people?
to read your book.
Oh, yeah. Breaking news today. Well, actually, it's not breaking news. I've been sharing it. But July 15th will be the first day it's technically on sale on our website. So
Oh, cool.
That's exciting.
That's excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent.
thank you. Can people connect with you anywhere? Where best to find you?
Yeah, so they can go to my website. It's juliebhughes.com. I'm also on Substack, so that's where I do a lot of my writing. And that's also at Julie B. Hughes, Substack.com.
Cool. Jeff and Julie, thank you so much for being on It Takes Balls.
Well, thank you very
Stephen,
much,
for having
Stephen.
us. Appreciate it.
For more information and resources for your testicular cancer journey, visit testicularcancerawarenessfoundation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Testis Cancer. We're on Facebook at Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation.